The judge who sentenced a man to life, and only then realized he was his long-lost son. He was known as one of the oldest, most respected judges in the country. Decades on the bench. Thousands of cases. A reputation for being firm, fair, and utterly committed to justice. But on one rainy afternoon, in a crowded courtroom, everything changed. The prosecution demanded the death penalty for a man accused of a violent crime. The evidence was strong, the media pressure intense, and the public furious. Yet, the judge, despite the heat, chose life in prison. He said the man's eyes held something that made him hesitate. The verdict was given. The sentence passed. But as the prisoner turned to leave, he muttered something under his breath. Just a word. A name. The judge froze. His heart stopped. That name was the same name he had whispered every night for over 30 years. Because the man he had just sentenced to life was his son. The son who had gone missing when he was only 6 years old. Welcome to Curiosidad Global. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a story of justice, guilt, secrets, and fate. Subscribe now to Curiosidad Global so you don't miss this emotional journey. Tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching this story? And ask yourself, what would you do if the man you condemned was the child you lost? Now, let's begin. The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed behind reporters. Murmurs buzzed through the rows of observers. The accused stood silently, hands cuffed, face unreadable. And behind the bench, Judge Harold Whitmore adjusted his glasses and prepared to speak. He was a man of stature. 72 years old. Nearly 50 spent serving the justice system. His reputation as a fair but strict judge was well earned, and this was one of the biggest cases of his career. The prosecution had pushed for the death penalty. The defendant, Victor Reyes, was accused of armed robbery turned homicide. A young man had died during the incident. Public opinion was bloodthirsty. But Judge Whitmore had hesitated. There was something strange about the defendant. Something not in the case files. Something in the way the man looked at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. But with recognition. Like someone seeing a ghost. Whitmore had reviewed the case from every angle. There was no doubt Victor had been involved. But instead of death, the judge gave life, without parole. When the gavel fell, the room erupted. Some praised the ruling as merciful justice. Others screamed that the judge had gone soft in his old age. But Whitmore barely heard them. Because as the guards turned Victor to lead him out of the courtroom, the man muttered a name. Not loud. Not clear. But enough for Whitmore to catch it. Michael. The judge's breath caught in his throat. Michael. It wasn't a random name. It was the name of his son. 31 years ago, Judge Whitmore had been a young prosecutor. His wife, Evelyn, was a brilliant literature professor. Their son, Michael, was 6 years old, curious, bright-eyed, and obsessed with airplanes. One morning, while Evelyn was grading papers and Harold was in court, Michael vanished. He had been playing in the front yard. When Evelyn stepped out to call him in, he was gone. There were no signs of struggle. No footprints. No witnesses. Just a toy plane lying in the grass. The search went on for weeks. Months. Years. The police followed every lead, but nothing stuck. Evelyn spiraled into grief, and Harold, drowning in guilt, buried himself in his work. Their marriage collapsed. The silence in their home became unbearable. Eventually, Harold moved out and filed for divorce. He never remarried. He never stopped looking. Every birthday, he lit a candle. Every year, he checked missing persons reports. And every night, before bed, he whispered the same prayer. Wherever you are, Michael, forgive me. That night, Judge Whitmore didn't sleep. He sat in his study, eyes fixed on the court transcript. He had heard the name. He knew what he'd heard. But it made no sense. Victor Reyes was 37 years old. According to the file, he had no known family. Foster homes. Juvenile detention. A long, winding road of abandonment. But the timeline fit. If Michael had survived. If he had been taken. If he had been given a new name. The judge called his clerk the next morning and requested the full, unredacted history of Victor Reyes, everything. From birth certificate to foster records, to school reports, to juvenile infractions. He also requested a DNA sample comparison from the Department of Corrections. The clerk hesitated. "Your Honor, may I ask why?" "Just get it, please." Discreetly. While waiting for the records, Whitmore visited an old friend, Marcus Halden, a retired detective who had worked the original missing child case. "You still think about it?" Marcus asked. "Every single day," Whitmore replied. Then added, "What if I told you I might have found him?" Marcus froze. The judge explained everything. The name. The voice. The look. Marcus didn't question it. "We'll pull the records together. We'll find out where he's been. If it's him, we'll know." That evening, Whitmore received the preliminary file. Victor Reyes had been found wandering alone in a bus terminal in Arizona at age 7. No ID. No relatives. He refused to talk for weeks. Eventually, he gave the name Victor. Authorities assumed abandonment and placed him in foster care. No one connected him to the missing Michael Whitmore. No one thought to compare the faces. Until now. The results came in 2 days later. Whitmore sat alone in his chambers when the clerk delivered the sealed envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it, the official document stamped and signed by the State Forensics Lab. 99.98% probability of biological match, parent and child. The judge dropped the paper. His vision blurred with tears. His lungs refused to expand. For the first time in decades, the cold mask of the courtroom cracked, and what lay underneath was a father. Michael was alive. He had been alive all along. And now, he was Victor Reyes. A man convicted of murder. A man Harold had just sentenced to die behind bars. The irony was unbearable. But the agony was worse. Harold paced his chambers for hours. His mind raced back and forth between guilt, confusion, and disbelief. He had dreamed of finding his son for decades, but not like this. Not chained. Not lost behind a life of crime. He called Marcus. "It's him. The DNA confirms it." Marcus was quiet on the other end. Then, "What are you going to do?" Harold didn't have an answer. Harold arranged a private visit. No robes. No titles. Just 2 men. He hadn't told Victor anything. He didn't want him to run. Or rage. Or reject him. When the guards brought him in, Victor sat across from the man who had sentenced him. He looked tired. Angry. But curious. "What is this? Another hearing?" "No," Harold said gently. "This is personal." Victor tilted his head. Narrowed his eyes. "You're not wearing the robe. I'm not here as a judge." A pause. Then Victor leaned back in his chair. "So why are you here?" Harold hesitated. Then pulled something from his pocket. A photograph. Worn. Faded. A child with messy hair holding a toy airplane. He placed it on the table. Victor stared at it. "That's..." His voice caught in his throat. "I've seen this before." Harold nodded. "It was taken a week before you disappeared. Your name wasn't always Victor." Victor's lips parted, but no sound came. "You were born Michael. Michael Whitmore. You're my son." The silence between them thickened like smoke. Victor slowly pushed back his chair, stunned. "No, that's not possible." Harold reached for the folder. Documents. DNA results. Timeline reports. He laid them out. Victor didn't touch them. He didn't have to. Because somewhere, deep in his bones, something clicked. Something old. something buried. Tears welled in his eyes. All these years. He looked at Harold. You're telling me you're the one who gave me life, and the one who took it away? Harold flinched. If I had known. Victor stood. His cuffs rattled against the table. But you didn't. You didn't even see me. Not then. Not now. Harold stood too. I'm sorry. I've spent 30 years searching for you. I never imagined that your son would turn into a criminal? A convict? A headline? Harold's voice broke. I never imagined my son would disappear at 6 and come back to me like this. They stared at each other, a father and a son, separated by more than time. Separated by a justice system. By fate. By pain. Then why am I still here? Victor asked. If you're really my father, why haven't you done anything? Harold didn't answer. Because he didn't know if he could. That night, Harold opened a bottle of whiskey he hadn't touched since the divorce. He stared at the photographs he had kept in a locked drawer for decades. Michael's baby shoes. His first school drawing. A letter he had never mailed to Evelyn. He knew he had a choice to make. Either let the verdict stand, or move to have it reopened. But reopening the case would expose everything. His relationship to Victor, his potential bias, and his decision to issue a life sentence instead of death. His reputation. His legacy. All of it could be called into question. He was a judge. He had always followed the law. But he was also a father. And his son needed more than a sentence. He needed the truth. Harold returned to court the next day and asked Marcus to dig into the original arrest. Background. Witnesses. Everything. You think he's innocent now? Marcus asked. I don't know, Harold said. But I know he deserves more than a life defined by silence. Together, they began uncovering strange details. Missing security footage. Conflicting eyewitness statements. A suppressed report from the crime scene. And suddenly, the man Harold had thought was guilty beyond doubt began to look very, very wronged. Let me take a moment to pause this beautiful story and ask you a question. Are you already subscribed to the Curiosidad Global channel? If not yet, subscribe now. It's completely free, and you help us continue bringing you new stories like this one. If you're enjoying the story, leave us a like and comment on this video. Your support makes all the difference. Now then, let's continue with the story. The deeper they dug, the more it didn't add up. Marcus reviewed the original police reports. One document stood out, a statement from a woman who had seen the crime unfold from a nearby balcony. Her description of the assailant didn't match Victor at all. She described someone taller, thinner, with a visible tattoo on his neck. Victor had no tattoos. But the report had been stamped irrelevant due to conflicting testimonies. It was never shown in court. This was buried, Marcus muttered, slapping the report down on Harold's desk. Someone didn't want this to complicate the case. Harold's heart pounded. He recognized the stamp. It came from an assistant DA named Barton. He remembered Barton's hunger for wins. The man had a history of cutting corners when it suited him. He wanted a quick conviction, Harold said. Victor didn't stand a chance. The next document Marcus brought in was even more damning. CCTV footage from a nearby shop had been logged into evidence, then mysteriously misplaced. It had never resurfaced. A receipt confirmed it had arrived in police custody, but no one had viewed it since. They were looking at a rush job. The crime had made headlines. The public had demanded justice. Someone needed to take the fall. And Victor Reyes, Michael, was an easy target. A foster kid with priors. No family. No alibi. Harold looked at the files spread across his desk. He had sentenced his son to life in prison based on evidence that was never complete. And now, that son had no idea how close he was to being free. That same night, Harold did something no judge had ever done in his 50-year career. He drafted a motion to vacate the verdict. He couldn't do it in his own courtroom. That would be conflict of interest. So he handed the file to a colleague, Judge Lorraine Keats, and asked her to review the evidence. He told her the truth. About Michael. About the DNA. About everything. She was shocked. "Are you willing to testify? To go on record?" she asked. "If that's what it takes." She nodded. "Then I'll call for a hearing." Within 72 hours, a formal review was scheduled. But there was a problem. Word had leaked. Reporters were already buzzing outside the courthouse. Headlines splashed across national outlets. Judge discovers convicted killer is his long-lost son. Conflict of interest or act of redemption. Harold refused to give statements. But Victor was confused and furious. He hadn't been told what was happening. Only that a judge had ordered him back to court. He assumed the worst. When he entered the hearing room, he saw Harold seated beside Marcus and Judge Keats at the bench. Victor froze. "What is this?" Harold stood. "It's a chance to finally get it right." Victor sat slowly, eyes narrowed. Then the evidence was presented. The suppressed witness. The missing footage. The discrepancies in the timeline. It was all laid bare, on the record, for the first time. Victor's lips parted as he listened. He wasn't just shocked. He was starting to hope. The hearing lasted 3 days. The prosecution tried to push back, to argue that no new evidence proved Victor hadn't been at the scene. But their case crumbled. Too many inconsistencies. Too much lost faith. Victor's public defender, now a senior attorney, fought hard. She had always felt uneasy about the trial, but never had the power to do anything. On the 3rd day, Harold was called to testify. The courtroom was tense. He took the stand. His voice was calm but heavy. "I am here not as a judge. Not as a man seeking redemption. I am here because the law, true law, is about truth. And I now believe that the truth was never fully seen." He explained the DNA match. The lost years. The silence. The heartbreak. And then he turned, looking straight at Victor. "I didn't find you in time to be the father you needed. But I will not let my court fail you again." Victor's jaw tightened. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the gavel came down. Judge Keats looked at Victor and said, "This court declares the original conviction vacated. A retrial is no longer necessary." Gasps echoed through the room. Victor Reyes was no longer an inmate. He was a free man. Harold closed his eyes. And for the first time in 30 years, he could breathe. The day Victor Reyes walked out of prison, there were no parades, no speeches, just silence. The sun was bright, too bright, and he had to squint. The world outside felt foreign, like walking into a movie set. Harold was waiting at the gate. No press. No cameras. Just him, standing by an old car that hadn't been driven in weeks. Victor approached slowly. Their eyes met. Harold opened the passenger door. "You're free to go anywhere. But if you want a ride, it's yours." Victor stood frozen. Part of him wanted to walk in the opposite direction, to find a bar, a cheap room, a place to disappear. But something in Harold's eyes, something not judgmental, not pleading, just present, kept him in place. He got in the car. They didn't speak during the ride. The radio played soft classical music. At one red light, Harold looked over and said, "I kept your baby shoes. And your drawings. I never let them go." Victor looked away, eyes glassy. "I don't even remember what my real name was." Harold whispered, "Michael. Your name is Michael." The silence after that word was heavy, but not painful. It was healing. Harold took Victor to a quiet place in the hills, a small cottage he'd once used for writing. It had no internet, no phone. Just books, a fireplace, and a porch that overlooked miles of trees. "Stay here as long as you need," Harold said. "I'll come by once in a while, if you want me to." Victor nodded. He didn't know how to feel. He'd been inside for almost 2 decades. He didn't know how to open a bank account. He didn't have an ID. He didn't even have a favorite food anymore. He had forgotten too much. But for the first time, he wasn't angry about that. He was curious. Each day he walked the trails behind the house. Some days he wrote. Other days he simply sat and listened, to the wind, the birds, the silence he never had in prison. Harold visited every Friday. Brought books, grocery bags, old photo albums. One day he brought a dog, a senior retriever named Max. Figured he could use some company. Like us, he's got a past too. Victor smiled for the first time in weeks. What's his story? Harold replied. He was abandoned. Took a while, but someone took him in. Victor patted the dog's head. I get it. 3 months after Victor's release, a knock came at the door of the cottage. Victor opened it cautiously and found a young woman standing there, notebook in hand. Sorry to bother you. My name's Rachel Miller. I'm with the Tribune. I'd like to ask about your story. Victor stepped back. Not interested. I understand. But people should know the full truth, not just the headlines. Victor paused. Do they want truth, or spectacle? Rachel didn't blink. I want the truth. The part no one else is telling. Victor stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he opened the door wider. They sat at the kitchen table. He made tea. Max laid down under the table like a guard. Victor spoke carefully, his words slow. He didn't glamorize prison. He didn't try to sound like a victim. He simply told it like it was, being forgotten, being blamed, becoming someone you didn't recognize just to survive. Rachel asked, what was the hardest part? Victor didn't even hesitate. Forgiving myself. Not for the crime. For becoming someone I wasn't, because no one told me who I was. She closed her notebook. Can I publish that? Victor nodded. Just don't make it pretty. Make it honest. Later that month, the article went viral. It wasn't scandalous, it was raw. Readers flooded the comments with messages of support. One line stood out. It's not just about injustice. It's about what happens after you've been broken, and someone still sees you.